Well, good afternoon everyone and welcome to the second of our live stream training provider updates. My name is Chris Zielinski and I will be your MC for today's event, which is brought to you by the Department for Innovation and Skills. Firstly, we'd really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope that you find the session informative. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Well, today's session you'll hear from the Honourable David Pisoni, Minister for Innovation and Skills, and Madeline Richardson, Executive Director, Skills and Workforce Capability, Department for Innovation and Skills. You'll also hear directly from training providers about their experiences in the current operating environment. Between each of our speakers and segments today, we will run some live polls. We encourage you to log on to Slido and submit your responses. Your participation will help us understand what your priorities are right now and how we can best support you or training providers more broadly going forward. To connect with us, go to www.sli.do, and to join, type #TPUpdate2. Poll results will be shown live on screen, so the more responses we receive, the greater insights we will have. Similarly, should you have any questions about any of the speakers or segments today, please submit them via Slido and indicate the speaker or segment your question relates to, and we will respond to those questions after the forum. To open the session today, we'll hear from the Honourable David Pisoni MP, Minister for Innovation and Skills. Unfortunately, the Minister was unable to be with us today, but we appreciate that he has provided us with a pre-recorded address.
Good afternoon and welcome. And while I can't join you personally today, I'm certainly with you in spirit. Strong partnerships between industry, training providers and government has resulted in South Australia achieving terrific results. The positive impact our skills investment and our collaboration is having has placed South Australia in a strong position as we address the significant impacts of COVID. However, there is still a lot of work to do. We can't escape the fact that South Australia's economy is facing significant challenges as a result of COVID-19. Latest data from June highlighted that 55,000 young people are not earning or learning. This is 10,000 more than the same time last year. 40% of workers do not have a post-school qualification, despite most in-demand jobs needing higher skill levels. Many still see skilled careers as a second choice to university. Our continued efforts to combat these challenges puts industry skills requirements at the centre of our training investment. The Marshall Liberal Government's $200 million Skilling South Australia program, which was a partnership of course with Morrison Government, has achieved nation-leading results. South Australia continues to meet our targets under the Skilling Australia National Partnership Agreement. Together, we have achieved 25,000 new apprenticeship and traineeship commencements over the last 2 financial years. More than 1,000 employers have hired their first apprentice since September 2018. And we have significantly expanded the number of apprenticeship and traineeship qualifications available over the subsidised training list, from around 350 from when we came to office to almost 800 now. We're creating apprenticeships in new industries. Industry now has a much stronger voice in our training system, and more than 130 skills projects designed to create new apprenticeships and traineeships are underway. We're working with you to provide professional development opportunities for vet practitioners and staff. A revamped marketing campaign will continue to challenge perceptions about skilled careers. We responded rapidly to COVID-19, announcing several projects under our vet market continuity package, including Skilling South Australia workforce projects such as Group Training Boost, are building capacity projects, Equip for Work, Equip for Growth and the COVID Clean Toolkit. Together, our efforts are achieving good results. The latest figures from the National Centre for Vocational Education and Research show that for the year ending the 31st of March 2020, apprentice and trainee commencements increased by 11.9% when compared to the previous year. This was the highest percentage increase of all the states and territories compared to a national decline of almost 8%. That's a 20% difference. As the 31st of March 2020, the number of apprentices and trainees in training increased by 10% when compared to the same period last year. And this was the highest percentage increase of all the states and territories, with a national decline of almost 3%. This is the first time in 5 years since September 2015 that we've had more than 18,000 people in training. This is a great achievement. And there are more pleasing numbers for apprentice and trainee commencements in March. Trade apprentices are up. We've seen an increase in the number of commencements for engineering, ICT and science technicians. For people aged 45 and over, an 83% increase in commencements. Increases in commencements in regional and remote parts of South Australia. And in addition, we've seen a 37% increase in a single year in a number of school-based apprentices. And this is a terrific pathway out of school. And there was a 210% increase in higher qualification apprentice and trainee commencements, reflecting the changing economy. These results are pleasing, but of course we must continue to work together to ensure these numbers don't slide and in fact they continue to grow. Job Trainer is an $88 million package with $53.5 billion from the Marshall government and $34.5 billion from the Morrison government. It will support school leavers and young people, job seekers and people affected by COVID-19. Job Trainer will drive a skills-led economic recovery from COVID-19, investing in high-demand skill areas such as aged care, disability and childcare, and also target new and emerging areas such as cybersecurity, ICT, defence and creative industries, delivered through low-fee, short courses or micro-credentials to meet the needs of individual sectors to ensure South Australians are supported to enter and re-enter the workforce. Job Trainer provides funding for both training and students and employer support services. The package will provide 15,000 training places, 11,500 skill sets and short courses and 3,500 qualifications agreed with the National Skills Commission and industry. Job Trainer aims to reduce youth unemployment, increase the number of South Australians with relevant and higher skill levels, re-engage qualified workers, stabilise supply with a view to economic recovery and ensure that vet market is meeting student and employer needs. We need to continue to meet the needs of emerging industries, and a flexible and agile vet sector can do this. Just last month, the Financial Review reported CEOs push for apprenticeship scheme to train ICT workers. And IRIS Chief Executive Andrew Walsh is quoted as saying, "People say, if you only had one area to work in, where would you go?" And he says, skills. This is just one example of how new industries are changing the landscape for apprentices and trainees with a broader range of skill sets to create new pathways into valued careers. Through Job Trainer, we will target school leavers, young people and job seekers now to connect to work and study, and to improve their employment prospects as the economy recovers. We will connect them with professional and technical skills training and support them and you with the wraparound services. We will upskill existing workers to be modern and industry ready, who can transition rapidly between jobs and industries. And we will continue to support training providers to quickly scale up to meet immediate training needs. I'm confident we will emerge from this uncertain time stronger than ever and equipped for a prosperous future. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your efforts in continuing to train our future workforce.
We'd like to thank the Minister for preparing the presentation for this event. It is greatly appreciated. As a reminder, you can submit any questions that you might have about the Minister, what the Minister spoke about via Slido, and we will look to answer those after the forum. I would now like to invite our next speaker to the lectern, Please welcome Madeline Richardson, Executive Director, Skills and Workforce Capability, Department for Innovation and Skills. Thanks, Madeline.
Hi and good afternoon, everybody. A really, really warm welcome and thank you for joining us. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on Kaurna land today and that we pay our respects to the Kaurna people. I've got 5 minutes to warm up the crowd today, so I could try out my new stand-up routine. Thought about a t-shirt, cannon, but look, I'll keep it professional today if that's okay. So in my time with you, I just wanted to really reflect on purpose. And I think in particular, we know there's a number of new opportunities across the skills portfolio at the moment. And as we've talked about, the spotlight is definitely on VET and it is shining bright. We also know you work incredibly hard to support and engage with your students, with your peers, with your partners, and with your networks as well. You're also incredibly committed to professional development, as evidenced by your participation today. So against this backdrop, it's always really important to stay centred around purpose and around outcomes. So for some initiatives that are live, I wanted to highlight a few and the purpose and outcomes that are really guiding our collective efforts. In relation to VET commissioning, as you would be aware, market sounding is underway. A Meet the Buyer session is coming up in your calendars for October as well. And the purpose around VET commissioning is really designed to deliver more opportunity to the market and more training to South Australians. And in doing so, we aim to improve market capacity, respond to demand and industry need, think about those strategic market directions, whether it's about innovation, speed to market, or ensuring that our training offer remains really current and contemporary. It's about increasing access and choice, and importantly, ensuring value for money as well. Reflecting on Job Trainer a little bit, as you heard from the Minister, this is a significant $88 million investment supported by the Commonwealth and state governments. The investment aims to support school leavers, young people and job seekers. We'll be coming back to you with more advice about the qualifications and skill sets supported through Job Trainer and importantly, the delivery and purchase arrangements that will underpin that as well. Stay tuned. So I'm reflecting on purpose for Job Trainer. We're aiming to ensure Job Trainer makes it easier to access skills in areas of demand and in those areas of growth. That individuals can gain the skills they need to kickstart and sustain a career or a better position to re-enter or transition across the workforce. Skilling South Australia, as many of you would know, under our Skilling South Australia umbrella, there are a range of initiatives. Those initiatives focus on removing barriers to apprenticeships and traineeships, supporting employers to take on an apprentice or trainees, and backing our partners through projects and new approaches in areas of demand and in particular in response to changing economic conditions. Thinking about purpose under SSA, it's really about those lasting and rewarding careers in VET that unlock, enable or grow passion for a technical and professional training pathway. We also want to retain and build the value of learning and working through apprenticeships and hopefully win some hearts and minds along the way. Turning to building capability and reflecting on purpose, today's session brings the VET spotlight on peer-to-peer information and insight sharing. We're really privileged to have with us today Judy, Fletcher and David, who will talk about some key issues that no doubt are front of mind for you, including work placements, including VET for school students and delivery, and importantly focus on organisational insights about what it looks like to move to online business as well. We're fortunate to have those providers join us today for the session. So our purpose under building capability, put simply, it's about inspiring and supporting excellence and promoting best practice. This includes innovation, leadership and growing the capacity and capability of the market and VET community. So in closing today, a common denominator in the initiatives and projects and programs I've spoken about is really partnership. We all have a skin in the game and share an important role in the stewardship, delivery and future of VET. I hope today is informative and continue to welcome your feedback and engagement. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Madeline. Again, if you have any questions for Madeline, please submit them via Slido. Just remember to indicate the speaker when submitting your question. We're now going to change the format a little, but first we're going to run the first of our live polls. So the first question, and you should see this on your screen, is you've told us that COVID has impacted your ability to support students to undertake work placements. Which industry sectors have been most impacted by this? Please provide one-word answers. Okay. So, unfortunately, I can't see what's coming up. So I'm going to move forward through to, but thank you for contributing to the live poll. We'll circle back on those after the forum. I would now like to introduce the first of our training providers. So first up we have Judy Atkinson, Chief Executive Officer, Childcare Services Training. The childcare industry relies heavily on work placements for students to complete their training and gain employment. Judy will be speaking with Juliana Fitzpatrick from the department about the impacts of COVID on the childcare industry and more specifically how work placements are being managed at this time. Thanks for joining us today, Judy. I'll hand over to Juliana.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome, Judy. Perhaps if we can start with you telling us a little bit about your organisation.
Well, Childcare Services Training is a very small RTO, and we have three full qualifications on our scope, and that is all to do with early childhood education, Certificate 3, the diploma, and also the diploma in school aged care. And we have about 200 students, so we're really focusing on early childhood education in childcare. And as well as that, we are also aligned with 4 childcare centres, so we actually understand the industry very well. And most of our training, except for our upskilling diploma students, is face-to-face. So,
well, then you work very much in an industry that I guess the outcome, everybody's going to be working face-to-face, looking after small children and dealing with families. Can you tell us how you were impacted in terms of training after COVID started to escalate and everyone responded?
Well, COVID, I think, changed the whole world, the whole landscape, not just training, but it certainly did present some rethinking for our organisation. And we were faced with, first of all, how we were going to support the students we had. We knew that they couldn't go into childcare centres because immediately, even though childcare continued, students were banned and trainers were banned from coming into the centre. Any visitors were banned. With our diploma students, most of them were upskilling anyway and existing workers so they could continue to work in childcare, but we could not go and mark on the job competencies. But we did have some very innovative ways of doing that. For example, we were able to use FaceTime or Messenger with the consent of the workplace and actually watch students do tasks in real time. With our vet in school students, they were unable to attend classes and they were certainly unable to go into childcare centres. So that didn't resume until the beginning of term 3, but we did continue to support them, and particularly when schools went back, the schools made it really clear that they wanted the students to continue their classes. So we were really fortunate at that time. We had just moved into larger training facilities, so we could do that really well, social distancing. And with our face-to-face Certificate 3 students, some of those students had already gained part-time work in centres, so they continued to work while completing their studies, but other students were unable to go and do the on-the-job component of their qualification. and the early childhood sector is really, really clear that they do not accept simulated situations in most cases, and it had to be real life situations. And I understand why, because if you're learning how to attend to a baby, a child, a doll actually is nothing like handling a real child. So we had to stop that. We had to stop the placements, and we had to support our students other ways to complete their work. And I guess we were really lucky that while we did that, we embedded, I guess, the health measures needed to be taken with COVID and how they related to early childhood education. So when the students did go back, they were really ready to actually comply. But it did...
Can I just ask, what were some of those examples of supporting the students so that when they did go back, they could comply with COVID in the workplace?
Well, they actually understood their responsibilities in relation to handling COVID, handling in contact with parents, contact with children, and all their learning with the children was actually based on children's wellbeing, children's health and safety. When we were invited back into our host centres, the centres were happy that we could present them with what we had been doing so that they knew the students were actually ready. We did change a lot of the way we delivered our courses. It's always been important to us to have face-to-face. However, we did provide podcasts. We did have a Moodle which had limited capacity, but so we've updated that, and we've also, to support our students further, developed podcasts for each unit of competency, so that even though we're doing face-to-face now, students can actually log into their portal and they can actually access the little podcasts for each unit. So if they forget something in the face-to-face, they can go back and refresh themselves.
What did this mean for your trainers in terms of, if you can just take yourself back a little bit from when COVID first started, there's no work placement, some students may not have been attending either. What was the impact on them, and what were you able to do to support them, I guess?
We have a very small team and they're really familiar with each other. They did support each other. They still came to work, and they really were focused on how we're going to best support our students. So I don't think they really had a lot of time to think about themselves. And our person who actually leads that team is really skilled at supporting the trainers. They have a very close relationship. But what it did mean was all of our team were, I guess, focused on developing new ways to support and new ways forward from, even though COVID may not be an issue into the future, they developed new ways to operate. And for example, they had a great deal of time to explore the Zoom and online platform, which they use now quite a bit and quite confidently. And they've just purchased some interactive large screen technology so that when they're doing their online Zoom, they can actually break students into chat rooms now. Because one of the big problems was students, when you're online and you're asking students questions online, they were very intimidated. No one wanted to speak up. So we discovered that there is a facility that we can use where we can break students into groups, into chat rooms, and they can actually talk with small groups. And that took a lot of learning for us.
I was just going to ask you, did it take some learning for the students, or were they good to go?
Actually, most of the students were pretty IT savvy, but not necessarily wanting, they really enjoyed the face-to-face classes, so they weren't necessarily wanting to do the Zoom platform. And at the beginning it wasn't that successful because they were scared to speak up. It was like a spotlight was shining on them. One thing to speak up in a class, but another thing to speak up when you're on a screen. So look, they're very comfortable with it now, and but they're back in the classroom as well. So it's also opened up new opportunities in our thinking in doing some what we'll call face-to-face Zoom learning for our out-of-school hours care students, our trainees, because they can't be away from the school service that they work, that we would we're thinking on a Friday afternoon perhaps we always do their face-to-face tutorials as well as visiting.
So in terms of, I guess, in the courses you deliver and the very real need for work placement that is not going to move away, and you said that it's not suitable to use simulation. I'm just wondering what other changes you've made perhaps to, or what does that mean for work placement for those courses now and the host employers and the students?
The students are all back and they are doing their work placements, and their host employers are actually quite comfortable with that. But there was a period of about 4.5 months where the students were not able to do that. We did do some simulation, but we didn't count that as marking off their on-the-job competencies, but we knew when we went back in there that they would actually be ready to be able to demonstrate that in real life. So, you know, changing a baby, changing a doll and changing a baby are actually two different things. You can actually get the skills to take off a nappy and put on a nappy, but it's different when you're dealing with a child that's moving and wriggling. But we did do some simulation, and we have done simulation and preparing food for children so that they have got the skill when they're back in their placement centres, that we can see that really clearly. They've had the practice.
And the workplace is quite supportive, I suppose, of a slight change in the way the students are prepared or when they come out, or is it for them? I'm just wondering how you've been able to support perhaps the workplace itself before the students come.
I'm an executive member of an employer group, so we know the host centres that we send people to, and they know how we operate. And so they have confidence in us, and we have confidence in them. And we were able to reassure them of what we'd done. They understood that. They also understood that we would not be replacing assessing people in the workplace with simulation.
Is there some, I suppose, while we have just a tiny bit of time left, some messages you might give to other RTOs when their courses are heavily reliant on work placement for completion, in your example, but any RTO?
The only advice I would give is that develop relationships with your host centres so that they know how you operate, they understand how you operate, and there's a mutual trust so that they know that the students that are coming from you are actually well prepared to go into their service and that they're prepared to support those students. I think that's the fundamental thing. It is about relationships with everybody concerned in the delivery of the qualification.
So I think we are at the end of our time, so you've done a very good job. I hope you felt comfortable up on stage. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us, and I'm really glad that it's been a success for you for what looked pretty dire back in March and April. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure.
So thank you, Juliana, and special thanks to Judy for sharing her experiences today. It's very much appreciated. We are about to do our second live poll, but before we do that, I thought I would circle back on the first live poll. We had a few technical difficulties, so apologies. Just by way, and I'm sure you can still see the poll up, so we're getting from those viewing today that aged care, hospitality and disability are the main sectors where work placement has been an issue, so thank you, and please keep submitting to the polls. So moving on to our second live poll. So this is a multiple choice question. So do you believe the VET readiness orientation, or the VETRO process, will be beneficial to your RTO and your student completion rates? So it's multiple choice. We have a yes, no, I have very little knowledge of the VETRO, or I have no knowledge of the VETRO. So for those 3 people that have hopped on already and polled, we'll just give it a minute to see what responses we get. So it looks like there's a bit of work to do with communicating what the VETRO is, which hopefully the next section or segment will help with. I think the majority of respondents are suggesting that there is limited knowledge or no knowledge of the VETRO. As indicated before, please continue to submit your responses. The results will form the basis of the upcoming discussions around VET for school students. So thank you very much. We'll have another poll after the next segment. I would now like to introduce Fletcher Pearce-Kane, Business Development Consultant from MADEC. Fletcher will be speaking with Michelle Potts from the department about MADEC's involvement in the VET for Schools VETRO trials. Welcome, Fletcher. I'll now hand over to Michelle.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Fletch, for coming along today. We're really pleased to have you here. Just while we're talking today, a reminder to providers that you can ask questions using Slido, and hopefully Fletch and I will intersperse our discussion today with some of those questions, and if not, we'll also try and find time at the end for them today. I think a good place to start, Fletcher, would be to tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and I guess also, how did MADEC come to be involved in VET for School student trials?
Yeah, so it was probably just under 6 years ago now that we looked at the VET in school market and took steps to engage and become part of that particular area. And when we first entered it, I think the one thing that struck me as being really quite alarming was the inconsistencies in how students were being appropriately vetted into pathways. So from school to school or region to region, there was just a bit of unknown as to what the correct process was, how schools should go about it. We also, I guess, saw the confusion with the documentation and the application process. So students with TGSS that need to do a Form A and a Form B. At that point in time, it was the ICANN exemption process, and there was just a lot of unknown and a lot of confusion, and it was quite messy. That's what we found. And so it was in 2016 that MADEC actually initiated what we called the Continuous Improvement Group for TGSS and ICANN exemptions. And really what that did, it involved us working with other stakeholders in the industry, so other training providers, VET coordinators, flow providers. We involved at the time Department of State Development and Department for Education, and we really kind of uncovered and tried to pick to bits what didn't work about the process and what did, and take steps to try and actually correct it or make it a bit more streamlined. Because what we found was there was perhaps a link between students not being successful in their VET pathway, and that might have actually come back to how they were being vetted and put forward for it. So that was something that we were really passionate about, trying to understand how that could work better. And from there, we actually put our own trial in place, which the department, you guys quickly picked up and supported us on, which was fantastic. And that involved us actually utilising the upfront assessment of need process with our school enrolled students. So we called it the School Enrolled Student UAN trial. And we were able to use the SRNI, which for those viewers who aren't familiar, it's a snapshot reading and numeracy indicator where we can use an online tool to assess a student's capabilities. That particular assessment will look at them being at an ACSF exit level 2 or above, which is what we'd be looking for the particular pathways MADEC offer. And if they needed further assessment, we were able to use the longer tool, the language and numeracy comprehensive assessment, so a much greater assessment tool being able to use for those students. And so that was a really interesting process, working with schools on implementing the UAN. And we'd obviously only ever seen it used for our non-school enrolled students, so it was really just adapting that model to our school cohort. And we were also able to utilise bridging units for those students that were identified as needing them. And that trial also saw learner support services be included as well. So I think that was, you know, a really important key to be able to have that whole wraparound service to support their student on their journey.
So in trialling the upfront assessment of need with the students, you were looking at suitability, support needs, literacy and numeracy?
Yep, so the whole work. So obviously the suitability side of it is determining have they got those key attributes required for that industry pathway.
Yes.
With the learning support needs, we're assessing their literacy and numeracy levels, mapping back to the ACSF levels of that qualification and specifically that qualification they're going into, and looking at whether there were any gaps that needed to be addressed.
Yeah.
And then the support needs is any other barriers for them, you know, gaining a successful outcome. So we're not just looking at one component, we're looking at that whole approach. And we found that the learner support services for school students was something really important that was missing also. It wasn't just about the language and numeracy, it was also about, you know, what else is going on in that young person's life that might be preventing them from having a successful outcome and pathway.
And you know, when you started that process, what did you see as a result of that after a while?
Yeah, we saw that perhaps there were a lot of students being put forward for pathways that would otherwise be deemed not yet suitable. And I think it was interesting seeing the schools work in that space as well, because it was something new to them, and we didn't want schools to feel like there was a spotlight being put on them. It was all about what was the best outcome for that student. And if maybe, you know, advising that the student isn't yet ready at this time, that is still a positive outcome for that student, because they would have been going forward into something that they wouldn't have been successful in.
So with that bit of background, tell us now how MADEC actually got involved in the expanded VETRO trials.
Yeah, so with the expanded trial, we're pretty pumped about this trial because it means there's a lot more other training providers involved as well. So it's not just about us rolling this out.
Yep.
We're working with a whole lot of other training providers, and with additional training providers means there's additional schools coming on board and regions, and we're gaining a much greater exposure than what we could have done just on our own. Yeah. And so with the expanded trial, we're not just looking at the upfront assessment of need, which is now going to be, we need to change our language to it being VETRO for school enrolled students, which is vet readiness orientation. Essentially, it's the same process. It is the UAN, but we're also trialling a new online referral form. So that's really key in working with the other RTOs, working with our schools, before the policy becomes ready to go come 2022. Now's the time for us to all work together and iron out any wrinkles that we've got and work together to really get a tool that we're all happy to use and gets a good result.
And the online form, how does that relate back to the current TGSS process?
Yeah, so the current TGSS process involves the Form A and Form B. And I'm sure I'm not alone when I say I'm pretty excited to be moving on the Form A. It's certainly been an administrative nightmare for a lot of RTOs and also schools, and that was some common feedback we had. It was really admin heavy, and some of it unnecessary, some of it just, you know, it wasn't working well. So the online referral is really about a school referring a student through to a pathway that they believe they're suited for. And then that initiates the VETRO process, which is where the RTO gets to come in and double, triple check that that student is actually suitable for that pathway.
Yeah. And have schools responded well to parking the TGSS paperwork and giving the
they
online?
Have. They sure have, yes.
Yeah.
Understandably, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how MADEC has gone about implementing the VETRO trial in the schools you work with.
Yeah, so generally for us, it would start with an information session in the school We usually coordinate that with the vet coordinator, and those students who have an interest in a particular pathway that we're offering will be invited to come in and hear about that qualification. And they're going to hear what sort of nominal hours it's got, what sort of SACE credits it's going to equate to, what sort of work placement requirements they're going to need to be absolutely on board with.
Yeah.
And we give them a really good insight into the actual industry and the job role at the end of it. So it's about exposing them to the good, the bad and the ugly so they can make an informed decision if they think, yeah, that is actually what I want to go forward with.
Yeah.
And if they do still at the end of that information session decide that that's the right pathway for them, then they'd go back to school and let their vet coordinator know, and the vet coordinator would complete that online referral. So that then instigates the RTO receiving our part of the referral, and that prompts Vetro to take place.
Fantastic. So looking ahead, what do you think are the next steps for the Vetro trial?
Yeah, so the next steps are really about the RTOs in the expanded trial collaborating with schools and really getting the message out there. And it sounds like from the poll, we've still got a bit of work to do even with our RTOs. But it's really, if I can, I guess, give one key message here, it's that we've got a really great opportunity as RTOs to be the change champions in this. It's such an exciting process where we've seen so many inconsistencies in having students put forward for vet in school programs. This is going to be a consistent approach that we can all get on board with. And I think what we'll find is that we get much greater retention, engagement and completion rates because we're actually having that opportunity to be that gateway from a student being referred to being accepted and moving forward with it.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the next steps are really the trial RTOs and schools getting on board with it and being open to the change and working through it and providing that feedback so that when it comes into play, we're already ready to go.
I'm having a little bit of trouble with my pad here, but I'm pretty sure that a common question would be, how are schools responding to your approach to be involved in Vetro?
Yeah, so the schools MADEC have already been working with in the UAN trial. It's really just the same sort of process with a different name.
Yeah.
But under the expanded trial, I suppose MADEC have been given an opportunity to be more of a mentor in this particular process. And even though there's some other training providers in the expanded trial who would normally be considered our competitors, it's an opportunity to work together to put that competitiveness aside and say, hey, what do we need to work on? How do we need to engage with schools? And really bust any myths that are out there about the negative side of it. So some schools may see it as, maybe it's blocking a student or preventing a student, when really what it's doing is setting them up for success.
Yeah, okay. That's fantastic. How have the providers in the trials drawn on you at the moment for support in that role that you were just talking about?
Yes.
What kind of things have they asked for help with?
Yep, so being able to present to school clusters and alliances. So we're working with some other providers to be able to get that message across. And it's also looking back and reflecting on what we've found difficult over the last 3 years and being able to share that with them as well so that we can sort of work through any of those issues popping up.
Yes.
But even just the practical side of how do we go about going in a school, how do we go about using school computers, how do we get the kids together, and also what the next steps are following conducting the actual assessment and relaying that information to the schools as well.
And do you think the RTOs have felt supported coming on board with the trial?
I think they have. I sure hope so. And they're very welcome to make contact with us if they are struggling with anything. But I think also having the learner support services component as well, we'll see a big shift in students being able to be successful, and schools will see that. So it's more just getting that message out there at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been very positive so far.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah, that's great. Unfortunately, we've run out of time to go through some of these questions, but I just want to assure everybody that we will answer those questions.
Yeah.
And I'd love to thank you for being here today.
No
It's been
worries.
fantastic. Thanks very
Michelle.
much.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Fletcher, for sharing your experiences around the Vetro trials. Very important component of the Vet for Schools policy rollout. Just a reminder that we are still receiving questions, or you're still able to submit questions, but these will be answered after the event. It's now time for our last poll. This one is, again, a multiple choice. So, what is your biggest challenge in delivering foundation skills? So there's 3 options there. You can select as many as appropriate. There's interpreting the upfront assessment of need, or the UAN, finding appropriate staff to deliver foundation skills, or developing learning resources. So just giving a few moments there for people to submit their responses. We have a sum total of 3 at the moment. Encourage you to respond to the poll and give us your feedback. It's very important. So we'll leave that open for a while, but it looks like the main feedback or option is developing learning resources. Oh, it's now being pipped by finding appropriate staff to deliver foundation skills. Okay, so while you're responding to the polls, we'll move on to our next segment for the day, our final guest. So please welcome David Watt, Compliance Manager from Interskills. Interskills have had to change its business as a result of COVID. David will be speaking with Juliana, who you met previously from the department, about Interskills' response to COVID and how they've pivoted their business to an online learning model. The relationship Interskills has with community education providers will also be discussed from an auspicing and a UAN perspective. I will now hand over to Juliana.
Thanks again, Chris. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I think before we start to talk about the topics that Chris just mentioned, perhaps if you can tell us a bit more about the different things that Interskills do as an organisation.
Yeah, well, we're an RTO that belongs to Wise Employment, which operates in the job active, DES and NDIS markets. So most of our clients are job seekers, people who are disadvantaged. So some of the issues that our students have come across are things like access, particularly in the COVID world. So things such as even enrolling in a course can be an issue, because they don't necessarily have a computer at home to do it online. During COVID, almost every job active and DES office was closed around the country, not just ours, but most of the providers had to close their offices. So their ability to go into the office to use their computers was taken away. Libraries closed down, so that sort of stuff was an issue. So just at the basic level of enrolling in a course, we rolled out an online enrolment portal that would operate on the smartphone. So that kind of solved part of the issue. We just had the problem that everybody needed to have a smartphone in order to do it. Yeah.
Part of the issue. But I imagine that once COVID hit well and truly and people were working from home, etc., that there would have been other impacts in delivering training. Would you like to talk about some of those?
For us, we only closed the RTO for 4 weeks, and of that, 2 of those weeks were during the school holidays. So we were only marginally impacted with that. And we had previously started rolling out last year, about this time last year, for our clients in the country, kind of a blended delivery model. So we'd have maybe 1 week in class and the next week on GoToMeeting or Zoom. So we had acclimatised our cohort to working in both modes of learning. So we were just left with having to kind of train our metropolitan students on how to engage in this way. And luckily it was a short period. When we did come back from the month lockdown, we brought back classes on a week on, week off scenario. So we continued with the online learning through, well not online, but the online delivery through GoToMeeting, and then we transitioned into Zoom. afterwards. So it kind of solved a lot of problems in that, and like the previous speakers, you know, the cohort is very IT savvy. The biggest issue for our cohort, however, was access to it, not the ability to use it.
And so access in terms of internet or access in terms of equipment?
Both, equipment and affording sufficient broadband download was kind of an issue. Our parent company, Wise Employment, they provided funding, or they would provide SIM cards, which had a preloaded value of data on there, so they could access it. In some circumstances interstate, they also provided them with a laptop on loan to actually do the course, and that's still going on today.
That's amazing. Oh, that's fantastic support from the organisation.
Very lucky, yeah.
And so have you made some innovative adjustments then, perhaps besides that, towards not just delivery but also assessment of
absolutely. With
students
there's always the issue of vocational placement, and we've kind of been lucky in the Certificate 3 in Individual Support Disability in that we haven't had a cohort that needed to go on the placement during the COVID period. So although we're coming up to that stage now, and we're putting in some processes to do some holistic assessment, but for other courses, for example, youth work, we had started about this time last year to implement an holistic assessment instead of vocational placement. We kind of came to the idea that there were a lot of activities that students needed to demonstrate that they couldn't actually demonstrate in the workplace anyway. So they were kind of going along and perhaps doing menial labour or just observing things rather than having the opportunity to participate and to demonstrate competency.
So I have to ask, what did you do about that then?
We hire actors. So for example, we have one activity at the end of the Cert 4 in youth work where there is a 2-day holistic assessment. They each have 3 appointments with clients, the actors, who each have problems. 2 of them then need to come back the following week with their parent, who's also an actor, and the student needs to advocate on behalf. So they would never get that opportunity in the workplace. And the fact that they're actors means that we can get the actors to do certain, to play it in a certain way. They can be, hard or soft. They can be. You have one which is a lawyer, which is not going to be talked into anything at all, which kind of raises the bar and allows the student to develop the skills that they need to demonstrate for us to assess competency.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. It's a really good project, and the other thing about it is we've had really good feedback from industry as to that whole process. The people that we've told in the industry, the players in the youth work sector, have all said that's a really excellent idea of demonstrating, because they know that when students come to them to do vocational placement, and it's not just from us, and it's not just from our sector, it's also from the university sector. It's like they know that there's not a lot of opportunity to develop this. So this has been a really positive thing. I know it's hard to say positive things about COVID, but it actually has brought about a really positive change in the way we do the holistic or the vocational placement component for some of these courses.
I mean, there's still the challenge of the 120 hours or whatever it might be, but at least potentially the students are competent before they go out. So
absolutely.
Not such a burden on the employer.
And the 120 hours, the compulsory placement doesn't appear in all qualifications, but we still get to cross that hurdle properly with the Cert 3 in Individual Support Disability. But that industry is very different than childcare that we heard from the first speaker, or from aged care, where you're going into an institute or an organisation, because disability is often dealt with in a person's home or in a daycare centre, though they can be an issue getting into. But shadowing a worker as they go from one person's private home to another person's private home, it's still easy to get that sort of placement.
Fantastic. I'm just mindful that one of the key questions that we have for you is foundation skills and inter-skills role in supporting our adult community education trainers in their delivery of, or your delivery of
Yep.
Courses. So would you mind expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah,
Keeping in
sure.
mind too that one of the highlights is either learning resources for foundation skills or finding the appropriate staff.
Yeah, we support, we partner with a range of ACE providers, adult community education providers here in Adelaide. We start the process by simply going and meeting with them and sitting and finding out what their cohort is interested in doing, what they have the facility to deliver, and how they want to structure the course. We start from that process. And then as compliance, I come in with my hat on and say, well, we need to make it fit this model. We need to tick off these boxes. And so we might adjust here and there, but by and large, everybody kind of understands that we need to tick those boxes and keep ASQA happy. And so then we develop the assessment materials and we jointly develop the delivery materials, the learning resources, and then we provide compliance oversight. So a couple of times a year I go out and visit all of the sites, look through their paperwork, have staff meetings with each of their trainers, and provide feedback. We also approve all of their marketing material because it's our name that's on there, and it's the NRT logo that's on there. So we're the ones that have to sign off on that. But with the change in the funding model,
The funded activities
the
agreement?
funded activities, yes, that's changed so that there is. We now engage directly with the training process in that we will go out to the ACE providers and we talk to their students about pathways for future learning. And that's not just for our RTO, it's like we look at the industry as a whole. We don't offer a large range of courses. We basically only do business, community services and foundation skills. We also provide bridging service training or bridging unit training for other RTOs and their students who haven't met the minimum requirements through the upfront assessment of needs. So we provide the bridging and either the students come to us or if there's a whole group of them, we'll send a trainer out to them and we contextualise that just as we do with the adult community education. We contextualise that to the industry that or the course that they're enrolling in. So, for example, it might be children's services or construction. It's like we create the assessment materials and overview or modify the training resources so that it meets the contextualisation requirements of the course that they're in. So,
from community education partnerships, you sort of sound like you haven't actually really missed a beat because of COVID anyway. You've had a little bit of breathing space.
Well, we're kind of lucky in that because of the change of the funding model, very few adult community providers actually operated in term 3 of this year. There was the end of term 2, which was affected, and probably like us, it was around about 4 weeks. Some organisations continued through because they had the space for social distancing, so they continued to do that. Others didn't, they moved online, and so we overviewed that and added our compliance tick of approval to the work that they were doing. And modified, if necessary, the assessment materials and the assessment as a whole. Sometimes it's a practical that you want to watch in the classroom, and other times, when we're moving into online, it's like, well, perhaps they could turn their camera on and we watch them do it, or they can have a photo taken of them. Yeah.
I've actually got more questions, but we don't have enough time. But thank you very much, David, for sharing all of that with us today and looking forward to term 4, I guess.
We are, absolutely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Juliana, and thanks, David, for your time today and for sharing your experiences through COVID and the engagement that Interskills is having with the adult community education providers. Well, that brings us, it's all we have time for today. It brings us to the end of our session. I would like to first thank our guests and speakers today. I'd also like to, in particular, thank the DIS team who pulled the event together. It's greatly appreciated. We hope you found the content informative, and with RTO sharing experiences, you've gained some insights into how other training providers are managing during the current environment. If you would like to re-watch the update or share the link with others, the live stream recording will be available to view after the event. We'll also provide links to online content and responses to questions that everyone who has registered will receive next week. And just in finishing, just a reminder, our next update will be an industry and training provider event, which will be held in November. So again, thank you for your time. We hope you have a great weekend.